Well, hello everyone, Pastor Mike here. It is the 23rd of February. The month is wrapping up. And this week, things are thawing, which is fantastic. So hopefully you are enjoying the veritable heat wave of around maybe, I think we're going to hit 40 degrees today. Hopefully that enlivens spirits. Well, here we are. We are fully into Lent. This Wednesday will be kind of our first midweek after Ash Wednesday, and things are moving along smoothly. We're also getting a little bit closer to how things used to be. We will be gathering in person for our midweek service. We're not having food yet, but hopefully in the near future it'll be safer to have everyone have Mass off for an extended period of time and be able to have soups and those sorts of things. But at the moment, we will gather, we will worship. This week, really, it's an interesting week. February is wrapping up, and we're moving into what I like to call the Covenant Lent. And that might seem interesting. This is the year of Mark, and I've been really thinking about these texts. And Mark does a lot with the Gospels, but in the lectionary, even more is done with the Old Testament readings. Now, what do I mean by that? Really, there's an interesting theme that is picked up, and that is the covenants that God makes throughout the Old Testament. And to look at those covenants to really help people see the promises of God and how ultimately in Lent we're moving toward the great promise of God being fulfilled. It's interesting. I mean, last week I didn't talk about it much because of the temptation, but it was Noah and the flood. That's one of the first covenants God makes. And the text brings that out to help us see that that covenant that was made, God has kept. So what was the covenant? Now, hopefully you all remember the story of Noah. Pretty much there was the tension of, hey, how do we handle a fully corrupted earth here? So there was a flood. But Noah and his spouse, three boys, their lady friends, all were on the boat together with a variety of animals to preserve them for after the flood. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Then it had to slowly drain, so they weren't really on the boat for 40 days, 40 nights, but it rained for that period of time to create enough water, to bring forth enough water to deal with the situation. And that's one of God's promises, is that afterwards, he goes to Noah and he goes to the sons and he says, hey, look, I'm not going to do this again. I'm never again going to flood the earth. Now it'll rain again. And as a sign that you don't need to stress and that I remember my covenant, I'm going to put my rainbow in the sky. That's actually why it's literally called a rainbow, because it was God's bow that he used to cast rain upon the earth. Pretty cool concept there. And hangs it up there in a sign of peace and no longer turning against humanity. It's a great story for understanding that. And every time it rains, we can see that God keeps God's covenant with us, that he doesn't wipe out the earth. And that's one of the first covenants God makes. And with those covenants, it is always a sign of God's love, compassion, and turning toward us till we get to this great covenant, which is the one Jesus Christ makes with us, the new covenant in my blood, shed for you and for all people for the forgiveness of sin. And ultimately, what it does is I think it helps us through this Lenten season by grounding us in how God is faithful. God has kept all of God's covenants, and God will continue to keep God's covenants. He makes promises with us. In many ways, the covenant of Noah is also connected to the covenant of baptism, is that we pass through the waters, as the Peter text reminded us on Sunday, and passing through the waters, just as Noah and his family did, saves us. It preserves us. It is God's promise. And that is one of the pieces that we're going to focus on in Lent. Hopefully on Sunday mornings, I'm going to look at some of those covenants and how God is faithful in those sorts of things. Over and over and over and over again. God keeps God's word. God is present in his meal. He always is. God saves us in his covenant he made with us in baptism. He does that. He saves us. He promises he will never abandon or forsake us, and he doesn't. God keeps God's covenants. The fascinating piece of it is how we struggle with that, and sometimes we miss it. See, the rainbow is a clear sign. It rains, God doesn't flood the earth. There are times where there's a lot of water, but he doesn't flood out the entirety of the earth. One of the sticky wickets that the apostles run into, the disciples, is God's covenant of the Messiah. God will send the Messiah. But it doesn't happen necessarily the way that they want. That is the struggle Peter continually has with Jesus. He wants the covenant to happen, especially in the way that he imagines it, that the triumphal Jesus will come in, everything will be perfect. His image of what this covenant has does not involve Jesus dying, especially on a cross. What shame, what horribleness there. It's not what Pete's down with. And even as we look at the covenants, we will always run into this problem. God keeps those covenants. God continues to keep God's covenants. But it often happens in ways that might not meet exactly what we want. God's faithfulness is not bound by our particularities, which is an interesting concept. And it's been something that I've been thinking about lately. Even as we continue to try to move forward and get back to reality and all these other sorts of things. I don't even know what terms to use anymore. Whatever is going on at the moment is in some ways normal. It's always funny, there's a new normal. There's always new normals. There's always reality changing around us, and we find a way that is normative for us as a society function. Always has been. Always will be. I mean, the normal of 1840 is not the normal of today, and that's probably good. Every year, normal changes a little bit. So in 2021, what's our norm going to be? What's it going to look like? We might be particular of what we want that to be. We might be very particular on how we think God should do that. But brothers and sisters, again, God's faithfulness, God's covenants are not bound by individual particularities. I have certain things that I want God to do as a sign and symbol of his faithfulness. He don't got to. In some ways, even as parents who have raised kids, I'll be there. I love you, and I'll take care of you. But that does not mean it's going to always happen in the way that you want. Giving you ice cream at every meal is not me loving and taking care of you. In fact, it's the opposite. It's probably getting you pretty sick. What does this look like? Again, it gets more complicated. The more older we get, the bigger society gets, all those other sorts of things. But that is, I think, a very important lens sometimes to take. And as we go through the covenants on Sunday mornings, I really want to keep that particularity in front of you. I just love using that word today, I guess. God is faithful, but it might not happen in the way that we want. And the other thing is Wednesday evenings. We will be gathering again, as I mentioned before. Our theme is really going to be looking at the wonderful passage, Perfect Love Casts Out Fear. It's a great passage. And we're looking at all the ways that God calls us to love and to understand love. In many ways, Sundays are about the covenants and God's faithfulness. And matched with that is Wednesday is going to be God's love and what that means for us in living in Lent. How does God's love guide us, call us? It's not just for us, but that love radiates through us. How do we love the neighbor? How do we love in harder situations? How does that love push us to sometimes beyond our worries, our struggles, all those other sorts of things? That is really what we're looking at in Lent. It's not super penitent. It's not super this, that, and the other. In many ways, this journey is already had enough weight on it, as I kind of mentioned on Sunday. There is enough clarity on our brokenness and our need for God. If you really want me to be even more clear on certain things about how broken we are and how much we need God, I'll gladly double down on that. But I think we're pretty clear right now. So let's through this 40 days see how God is mending this brokenness and drawing us to that cross, which is the ultimate covenant, ultimate act of faithfulness, an ultimate act of love for us to bind up this broken world. Well, that's kind of what's been on my mind. Hopefully, continue. Again, I call this a check-in. Hopefully, everybody's doing well. Hopefully, everybody's hanging in there. Hopefully, you're able to do some devotions, do those sorts of things. Hopefully, you're able to even take that midday meditation. And again, I'm not putting questions. I'm not putting a lot on it. I want you guys to just listen to the text. Psalms are beautiful. Psalms speak. Listen, and then pray. That's it. Take that moment, calm, let the text speak to you, move through you. Let God's word that we've been thanking him so much for in online worship do what it does best. All right. Blessings, brothers and sisters. As always, you need me, holler. Shoot an email. Shoot me a text. Blessings. Talk to you soon. Bye now.